is going on, awesome superhero aficionados? This is the Heroes and Vegans podcast, your number one source of superhero talk. I'm Nick. We got all the gang together. I'm super pumped, super excited. It's been a little bit, but Jimmy, Ruben, Eric, thank you guys all for joining us. It's just really cool to have all you guys back together. Hope everybody is doing well and living their best lives and just continued health, wealth, and prosperity.
I wanted to mention a couple things since I'm coming back to this. Has been a minute. I've been moving for a few weeks, so I have literally not watched any TV in weeks. I haven't watched any movies or television shows. I haven't kept up with anything. So the only thing I know of She-Hulk at this point is what I've heard on social media, but I have been I don't even have my TV cooked up yet, so I have been completely cut off from television and entertainment for a while.
That's all right. That's all right.
Well, you heard on media is all that matters.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Been a little bit since we last did an episode. I know it was hard for us to kind of find a date to get everybody to get together. Just conflicts were happening, so it was hard sorry about that to you guys. I know we were out on a while. We were going every week and more frequently, so we're trying to get back on that same kind of schedule, but just making sure that we still obviously post a lot of updates to the IG page, so make sure you guys are following there. We have a TikTok that Eric linked to our YouTube page, so make sure to check out about that. So that being said, obviously we're a little bit behind schedule, and more so because She-Hulk is already in its third episode, going to be in its fourth episode probably by the time we release this. So we're going to get into talking about that. Obviously, Jimmy unfortunately hasn't seen it, but we're going to cover it as much as we can, as well as we can, and all things in and out of that. So overall, let's just talk from there. Did you guys have any high expectations, or what was it that you guys had? I'm going to start with Eric, because Eric is obviously the big Hulk guy, is the aforementioned Hulk connoisseur expert. So Eric, what was your thoughts leading into She-Hulk? Did you have high expectations for it, or is it playing out exactly the way you thought, overall, what do you think about it?
So I didn't have high expectations for it, mainly because as much of a fan of Hulk as I am, I actually wasn't that familiar with She-Hulk comics. So when I heard that there was going to be a She-Hulk show, I actually did what probably a lot of you guys did too, is just go back and look at some of the comics, some of the runs. And it's really interesting because there's two different types of She-Hulks that you see in the comics. One is taking itself very seriously, and it's almost like a cut and paste of Hulk and Bruce Banner, and you get a very angry She-Hulk who just goes ballistic and all that, just like you would see Hulk do. But I think the more popular She-Hulk version that we see in the comic books that a lot of people like to is actually this She-Hulk that doesn't take itself too seriously. And that comic book, I mean, by now it's well known that She-Hulk was one of the first Marvel comic book characters to break the fourth wall, right? And to be aware that they're in a comic book, even before Deadpool. So I think that was really interesting to find that out in doing my research before watching She-Hulk. And honestly, just from the first 3 episodes of what I've seen so far, and it really being more of a comedy, I actually really enjoy it. And I almost feel like She-Hulk, the character itself, is actually the closest to the comic book adaptations out of all MCU characters. And the reason I say that, I know a lot of people haven't liked what they've been doing with She-Hulk with the different episodes and how it's campy humor and borderline immature humor. And I remember seeing someone on Twitter say this show is made for immature people. And then in my mind, I guess I'm just immature then, but I'm purely watching this for entertainment value. I'm not watching She-Hulk fully expecting it to be this serious show like Daredevil was, right? Daredevil, obviously you have the superhero, you have the law, he's a lawyer also. I think a lot of people were kind of expecting that, and I wasn't, because I looked into the comics before watching the show. So I'm actually very surprised by the show, and I like it a lot. I'll watch it with my wife, and we find ourselves just laughing at the jokes that they're doing on there, and the cameos are great too, and we'll probably get into that a little more. But so far, I'm actually really enjoying the show, and I think it's really good so far as as like the MCU's first foray into like actual humor, right? Just a comedy show. So
Yeah,
that's my
definitely.
take. I actually really like it.
I want to interject
Yeah,
something.
as for
Go
me,
on.
I think it's pretty solid. I think it's pretty good. I didn't have really high expectations for it because I just coming into it, I was like, all right, they're I'm not mad at it because Marvel is basically, helping us out, us as fans, bringing out shows and movies, left and right. And so lately they've been doing solid. So I didn't have no high expectations, but I did kind of expect it to be where it's at, where it's going with it, where the show is going. And it's pretty solid because Jen, right?
Yeah,
She
Walters.
she
Yeah.
freaking she's funny, dude. It is comedy. I ain't gonna lie. People do kind of dislike, like, oh, why do we have like some, scrawny little, actor? Like, we should have had someone a little bit more like, muscular or something. But in my head, it's like, nah, man, it's not always about that. Like Eric was saying, if it could relate to the comics as much as it can, I'm all for it. I'm all for it, and that's what I love about it. Like Eric is saying, it does correlate with the comics. Like, she's not taking herself too seriously, or yet, like she's still trying to get a hang of her powers, basically. And
Mhm.
I think it's funny though. Yeah, I catch myself laughing here, left and right, here and there. Sometimes I feel like it is a little too slow, but that's how every show is, or every movie.
Yeah.
It's gonna have to have a little down part. But
Yeah.
other than that, I like what they're doing. We're going into the 4th episode, and I think for this one, now we're talking about expectation. I think this 4th episode is gonna have to be the one that has to reel me in. If this 4th episode doesn't do it for me, I don't know what to think moving forward.
Yeah. See, I don't think there has to be like a reel in for a comedy. It's like I think
Very
of pa-
true.
I think of past comedies I've watched like that I've really liked, like Community or like Parks and Rec, and it's just a show I can go back to, watch an episode, think it's funny, and that's that. I think people just have these high expectations with MCU being like, this whole season is supposed to be a full story and supposed to lead somewhere. I would not be
Full-on
disappointed.
action.
I would not be disappointed if this doesn't lead anywhere. If it's just
Okay, I get
She-Hulk
what
being
you're saying.
She-Hulk every episode, and if the next season is more of the same, more along the lines of a sitcom than like a drama. So I think that, I don't know, that's kind of how I'm seeing it, and why
Nah,
I
most
just enjoy
definitely.
the entertainment value of it.
Very
Yeah.
true.
I
Put it
wanted
that
to
way.
interject something as somebody who hasn't seen the show. I've actually had the chance recently, because of a friend of mine, over social media, shared like different like issues and like panels of it. And from what I've seen of the comic book, it's very self-aware. It is very much a comedy comic book. It doesn't take itself seriously.
Mhm.
And I've heard a lot of complaints about it, but the complaints sound like they could equally apply to the comic book that I was checking
Yes.
out of the show. So I can't speak on the show, but I did familiarize myself with some She-Hulk comics.
Nice.
It's pretty funny because a while back I had a coworker. She was actually a bit, and this is around the time I started getting into comics, but she was actually a big She-Hulk fan. I remember just talking like, "Oh, who's your favorite hero?" I was like, "You know what? I really can't wait for She-Hulk. She-Hulk's gonna come at some point." Obviously, the branding of the Hulk, like the Hulk was seen as one of Marvel's better associated characters, at least in the media. So obviously, at some point there was gonna be that where she was, or they were gonna bring her character into the MCU. So leading up to it, I didn't really know what to expect, obviously, with that connection with Bruce and how that was all going to play out. And I didn't exactly see too much from I'm not somebody who dives deep into trailers. Like, I might try to, not that I try to avoid them, but I try not to think on them too much, or I try not to be so much like analyzing every detail and try to come up with these introspective analysis like, oh, this is going to lead to that. I'd rather just watch it, be excited for it, as opposed to watching it and maybe aside from maybe having a little bit of a theory, but that being more a speculatory kind of thing. But leading up to it, I actually thought the show started off pretty strong. I mean, we get that nice little banter, and that I actually think that the actress Tatiana Maslany, is that her name?
Yeah.
I think it's her and Mark Ruffalo. I think they have really great chemistry, and it was pretty cool to have it just open up with that. And then we obviously got to like they're hinting kind of at World War Hulk with the ship from Sakaar coming and driving them off the road. I actually thought it was going to be to like where it was in the comics, where she becomes She-Hulk because he gives her a blood transfusion after she gets shot, and she needs it to save her life. It kind of feels, I think it's it could have been I would have preferred it done that way as opposed to just, it's still a blood transfusion, but more of a kind of, I think it would be more playing off of that you were chosen for this higher power. This is something like you were chosen for, as opposed to just being like an accident. That's just my whole thing. I think in the comics it was done a little bit better to how she comes She-Hulk. And then we also see like that little hint of like that relationship between Bruce and Tony, that he was the one who, that was where he became Professor Hulk, and that lab that Tony had built for him, or that they had worked on together. And you see like further echoing those sentiments on how close they were as friends. So seeing a lot of that was pretty cool. I think the only thing I don't like about is that first one is like we don't see the Hulk as strong as like he was before. I mean, you're seeing in that first Avengers movie, he throws a punch and it levels that, it catapults and allows that the Chitauri ship just comes crashing over and he doesn't move that much. But yet she drives a car at like 40, 50 miles an hour and that knocks him back. So it's like, I understand there's going to be those kind of continuity stuff, and it's more going to be playing off the story that they're telling and the setting. But I don't know. How do you guys feel about that whole thing?
Eric?
I guess it's going back to the first episode, right? And
Yeah,
I thought it was really cool. I like the pace of the first episode. They didn't dwell too much on how she gets her powers and stuff. And I think them doing it with a happy accident was probably like the cleanest way to just do it and get it over with. And it did feel very much like that. I felt like, all right, we just need to give her powers and move on with the story as fast as
and
possible.
that's exactly what it is. Yeah, the pacing was just very like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, so it literally happens in the first few minutes of the episode. She gets her powers, and then I know there was a lot of talk about how quick she masters her powers.
Yeah.
And where people are like, I can't believe she's saying she's better than Hulk, and that because she can control her anger, like all of a sudden she's just as good as Hulk. And I think it's interesting because in the later episode they kind of address how like the show kind of mimics real life and makes fun of it, where they're like, oh, why do we have a female Hulk and this and that in the show itself? And you see like the comments go through. I'm like, oh, this is literally what people were saying when they first announced that there was a She-Hulk show.
Yeah, dude.
And it's just like the sexism is real. And on top of that, they have her just, and it was really interesting. I told you I watched it with my wife, and it was really interesting when she said like, the reason I can control the powers is because I'm a woman, because literally like I have to learn to control my anger all the time. And my wife was like, that's so true. Like we really do. And people are upset at that, but literally in the first Avengers movie, the Hulk says his secret is that he's always angry.
He's always angry.
Like that's the whole point. So she's already gotten there emotionally speaking. And then they're like, well, why doesn't she go crazy like the Hulk does? And I think this is a disservice that's been done in the MCU with Hulk, is that they never really touched on why he has two personalities, which actually goes back in the comic books, in the origins. He was abused by his dad in the comic books. And that's what kind of creates the split personality, more along the lines of like Moon Knight, right? Where you see that in Moon Knight, where he has a split personality. And just
they do hint at that in the original Hulk movie with Ang Lee, Eric Bana. There's kind of a semblance, but as far as like in the MCU, there's not really. We get touched, like the closest they come to that is like the Incredible Hulk, when there's that talk with they're two different distinct personalities, but at the same time it's still a level of Bruce that is in the Hulk also, because obviously like Betty talks about, it seems like he knew me, it seems like there's a part of you still in there, but your mind is just a little charged and can't really process things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So because that hasn't really been fleshed out in the MCU, people don't understand that. They just see a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of character. Whereas if these powers are transferred to someone else like Jennifer, like she's able to have more control of it for two different reasons now, because she didn't suffer that same abuse, but also because her being a woman, she has more emotional maturity than Bruce did. So I think them kind of playing that off too, and how fast she controls her powers, I think that was actually really smart how they did it, and it works. And but I know there were a lot of complaints about that.
But even then too, she doesn't come off as somebody who has mastered full control of her powers. She just seems like she's somebody who's gotten some experience and some understanding of how things work, how strong, powerful she can be, and is coming off a little cocky and conceited. Because even on the thunderclap, like we see Bruce actually like knock her back far, and hers is
Yeah.
more of like a thunder applause kind of thing than like
Yeah.
a clap.
It
So-
almost looked like the guns that they use on the Hulk in the first Hulk movie, where it's like the
sound
waves that
Oh,
made him
yeah,
go
yeah,
down
yeah,
when he
like
was
the-
fighting
yeah.
Abomination. So yeah,
But
so
I think as far as like the complaints I kind of have with this portrayal of the Hulk, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not more so because, like I said, I'm more echoing those kind of sentiments about that classic version of a Hulk being that raging, fueled anger monster, but also because of the kind of dilemma and the implications that come with it, like how, like what kind of we only closest we saw to that is like Age of Ultron, where he's kind of going into that dilemma and relating that to Black Widow. But
yeah,
aside from that, I think what I do respect and I appreciate about this portrayal of Professor Hulk, Bruce Banner, is that we actually see him more as that mentor and that teacher. We've seen the scientist, one of the most brilliant minds on the planet, but now we see all that experience that he's gathered from being the Hulk, and now he's relating that to somebody else. We see like the mentor, the teacher from
Mhm.
that aspect about like being a hero. So I think I appreciate and respect that kind of maturity with the character. That's probably the coolest thing I thought about it.
yeah, definitely.
Most
Yeah.
definitely. Dude.
And I like that they didn't push that story too long. Like that was the first episode, parts of the second episode,
Yeah.
where he's like the mentor but I think it's very cool, like their relationship. You talked about their chemistry between the actors and just the characters themselves. I
Yeah.
thought it was really cool to see that, almost like a friendship, because especially when She-Hulk says, I actually want to go back to doing my job and doing law, and I have to, and she's given the task of having to defend Abomination. Then she talks to Bruce, and Bruce is like, you know what, go for it, like I trust you, and like I'm here for you if you need me. Like
Yeah.
that's very much like a really good friendship that's being shown on screen. But
Mhm.
then soon after, you just see the Hulk leave, right? so they're not gonna like stay on that too much. And
Yeah.
the same thing with the whole Abomination case. Like, yeah, it's showing her struggling, trying to actually continue doing what she loves to do, being a lawyer, with now having to be a superhero. And they don't stick with that for too long with the Abomination story, right?
Yeah.
So I like how I like the pace of this show. I like how fast it's moving on to the next thing, and it's not just like, I didn't want a whole season of her figuring out her powers with the Hulk. Like we don't need that.
Yeah, you're right about that. Every episode is moving into something different right out the bat. Like you said, the first episode, it was basically the origin story, a quick one in the first 5 minutes. And
Mhm.
then the second episode, it's about her trying to control her, her powers. And then the third one, it's just about helping Abomination. And then, like I said, it wasn't too much, but that's what I'm saying. The next episode, like I said, I'm interested to see what they're gonna do next. Like who's
Yeah.
gonna be the next main antagonist? Because it's not gonna be Abomination, or maybe, and even she said in one of the recent episode where it was like, oh, like this show's about me. Like it's not about
Yeah.
anybody else, like, or cameos and this and that. But there's already been like 3 of them, and she
Yeah.
even named them all, and then she's like, huh. But so I thought that was pretty funny too, and all that. So I was like, she was hinting out on something that's to come, so I'm expecting nothing big, but like you said, it's been funny, and I'm expecting something little, like, to catch me off guard at least. Like, okay, what is Marvel gonna hit me with next?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm looking forward to the 4th
Yeah.
episode. For sure.
I also want to point out, like, you remember when we were having these discussions about WandaVision when it first came out? First 3 episodes are so slow, everyone's still trying to figure out what's going on, and then it like picked up, right? And you're like, okay, this is what's happening with the show. It could be that this is kind of what we're getting with She-Hulk too, where it just establish the character, establish who her friends are, establish what she's trying to do, and then maybe we'll start getting an overarching story, right?
To be clear, I don't think the first 3 episodes of WandaVision are slow at all, in my opinion.
I don't either. I think it's
I
perfectly
personally
paced,
don't.
honestly.
Yeah,
I know.
don't think
I
that-
loved it. I loved it, and I love the callback to those earlier shows. But I just remember just defending WandaVision online, and
Yeah,
everyone
same.
was talking about how horrible it was, how slow it was, and I just clearly remember that, and
Yeah.
I'm feeling a lot of the same things right now with She-Hulk, where I'm over here defending it because I think it's funny, I think it's well made, I think they're onto something, and other people are like, no, we want more I don't know, this like cookie cutter version of MCU that they're so used to.
Yeah. Now people are getting used to with all the news coming out, like Daredevil and the Punisher, and then Deadpool, his new
Yeah.
movie coming soon. They haven't announced it yet, but I just feel like they're used to the dark side of it, or just
I
all
mean-
the action aspect of it, you know.
Yeah.
Which that like sometimes it hits me like that, like, hey, you know what, I do just want to see the action. And like I said, I love comedy and I love action. Those are my two top. So when they put them in the mix, it's even better. But like I said, I do like to expect action sometimes, but it's not always. You can't always get what you want, you know.
Okay, I want to kind of give my opinion again. Take this with a grain of salt because this is coming from a perspective of someone who has not watched it yet. But I find some of the complaints that I've seen interesting, like you said, because it's not all dark. I feel like the MCU is so vast at this point, and it's been around for like a decade and a half now, approaching a decade and a half. And it has such a wide variety of characters and stories. It stands to reason that within this universe, where there is like a universe full of superpowered people, there's going to be regular day-to-day life things going on. Not everything is going to be an end of the world threat. Not everything is going to be constant tension. There's going to be superhumans living their lives and going on with it. And I think with such a vast array of television shows now and movies, I think it's at a point where it's okay to try to explore a TV show or a movie that is at
That's more
a more
minor.
relaxed pace at this point.
I'm glad you brought that up because it just goes back to remind me of Infinity. Infinity Wars, because when Tom Holland, Spider-Man ends up in the spaceship, and then Tony Stark is all like, "What are you doing here, kid?" You know, he's like, "Well, in a way, it's your fault I'm here." He's like, "What'd you say?" But then he's all like, "Well, come on, you know, Mr. Stark, like, I can't be no friendly hood neighborhood if there's no neighborhood, you know, like friendly hood neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood." And then Stark like, "What?" He's like, "But you know what I mean." And it's kind of something similar to what you're saying, Jimmy. You know, it's like he just wants to do the smart part, you know, like help the smaller guy, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the cool things I think that the show does is with regards to the source material, because in the comics, she actually does work at J, L, K, and H. So actually, the cool thing was that's actually a nod to 3 comic icons. So the JLK, obviously, H stands for Holloway, which is her boss, the one that recruits her to head that superhuman division or be the head of that.
Yeah.
The JLK stands for Goodman, Lieber, and Kurtzberg. So Goodman is actually Martin Goodman. He was the first publisher of Marvel Comics. I think it was Atlas Comics at the time. Lieber is actually Stan Lee's birth name. And then Kurtzberg is actually Jack the King Kirby's birth name also. So I find that that's pretty cool that they were able to include that and kind of have that be a callback to comic icons who helped shape modern comics as we know it, and still like feeling their inspiration decades and years later. So I think that part is pretty cool. So what about you guys? For those, the 3 that you've seen, the other 2 that have seen this, who's been the standout performance for you guys?
Standout performance. Probably, I mean, the main character for me, like She-Hulk. I think she's doing a good job at not just showing like a strong like female character, but as like portraying a character that's relatable. And I think that's really important to remember. Like, not all of these superheroes need to be like role models.
Yeah.
And I know like that's, especially when it comes to female characters, a lot of people are like, I mean, I have 2 daughters, right? And they're like, oh, I want superheroes that my daughters can relate to and look up to. I'm like, not everyone can be Wonder Woman though. And how come we don't have that same expectation for men? Right? Like, we got Deadpool out here. I do not want my son to turn out like Deadpool, obviously, but I like the character and I like his flaws. And like with other characters, other like male superheroes, like there's cool stuff that you can see with each one. And the best characters are the ones that are typically the most relatable, right? Like you're talking about Spider-Man, like probably the most popular fictional superhero ever, or character ever. He was super relatable for a lot of teenagers at the time, and that's why he got super popular. I think Jennifer Walters is being portrayed as a very relatable woman in the workforce, and not only as a lawyer, but also now having to deal with the superhero stuff on top of that, and people saying, well, if you're a superhero or you're like Hulk and just continuously being compared to the Hulk in the show, it's really interesting to see. And again, just from my conversations with my wife, it's something that people deal with. Now you're just seeing it in a superhero show, in the superhero universe, what that might look like. And I think it's really cool to see and just get that perspective. And I think she's doing a really awesome job at both being funny and entertaining, but also showing like the perspective of someone that wants to be taken seriously.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would have to
David.
agree with Derek. I mean, besides the Abomination trying to reform himself and all that, I mean, it would have to be She-Hulk. But I mean, he's on a close second because I mean, we
Yeah.
have had 3 cameos, but like in reality, we haven't really got introduced to too much, you know. And like
Mhm.
Eric said, we're still trying to find out who's her friend, who's gonna play an antagonist and all that. You know, hasn't really caught on because if you think about it, everyone is playing the role the way they should be playing the role. They're playing it right. That's what I think.
Yeah.
And I think She-Hulk, she's the one killing it. She's the main focus of the show. And I think that's why she kind of reminded us, like, hey, don't just focus on these cameos, you know, like don't forget this show is about me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, girl, you're right. It's about you know. And so I think, yeah, she's the main one, but second close, it has to be, you know, the actor for Abomination because he is playing that whole, you know, reformed role. And
Yeah.
could relate to that too, and whether you were in prison or just in general, where you're in a depressed kind of state, you know, like you try to reform yourself to a healthier state of mind. And I feel like he played the part right, and especially when when he was in front of the council, you know, to see if
Yeah.
he could get his parole, the parole committee. So like, you know, he wanted to get paroled, and I felt like he played the role of his reformed self so good that I gave him like a round of applause, you know, like, hey man,
Yeah.
like you really saying you changed that good and all that. I mean, who knows? He may or may not be lying, you know, because when you're in jail, you know, you just want to get out. Fucking, oh my bad. So I just feel like he's doing it good. He's doing it good. He did a good. He played a good role.
Yeah.
in the
That's
show.
a
and then I
that's a
don't know
good
what he
point.
can do moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
This-
I like
that's
that
actually,
actor. I like
that's
that
like
actor a
he's
lot.
actually
Yeah.
my choice. Granted, it's easy. Tatiana Maslany, she gives a great performance, and I think she does a great job making this character very relatable, especially for people who we had no idea she existed. Obviously, us comic book nerds, we definitely knew that. We were eager to see how this portrayal was going to go, and she knocks it out of the park. But for me, it's always easiest to pick those because they're the ones you spend the most time with. They have the most screen time. They're the ones that your eyes are set on. But Tim Roth, he doesn't have, who plays Abomination, Emil Blonsky, he doesn't have as much screen time, but every scene he's in, he steals it, and it's always a delight to watch him, especially because we're seeing him in that different light. We're not seeing him as that crazed, homicidal, psychopathic maniac who is rampaging around Harlem, destroying things and trying to kill the Hulk and trying to kill General Ross and all that. But I think more so it just goes to show the acting ability. Like you see that juxtaposition and that charismatic serenity look in his eyes, especially with like the pen pals. Like, oh, these are all my better ace. I thought that was like a very funny. He's all like, I love you guys. Like that. That part was also pretty cool.
That pen pal part had me dying when it went.
Yeah,
it was funny. Yeah.
Oh man.
Especially just because like it just seems like there's a lot of sincerity. Obviously, we know that there's more what I'm excited about is they're hinting towards the Thunderbolts, and I think Madam Hydra is his parole officer, and that's going to be kind of like his initiation thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if she spearheaded this whole thing, like act like you're totally reformed. Like granted, I think there is a hint of that, but I don't think that side of him, because obviously like what we saw as when he became Abomination, like there was something that definitely affected his brain chemistry where he's just, I think there's a matter of him definitely acting the part. But I'm excited for the Thunderbolts. Like I said, that's the thing that I'm looking forward to the most, and I definitely can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
I'm definitely gonna catch up on it soon as I get my television set up, and I'll give you my opinion on it. But I'm looking forward to it. Like I wasn't, but like I feel like some of the divided reaction has only made me more interested. Whenever I hear something like splits people's opinions, like the way that this has, I become more intrigued by it or more drawn to it. So
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Yeah.
because honestly, I think recently too, that's just the only thing where I didn't exactly feel like it really pushed the quality of the show, or the show. It seemed like it was more doing it for meme culture and to appeal to that Generation Z. I really didn't care for the twerking scene and the whole having Megan the like the minute you see Megan the Stallion actually pop up, I'm like, something is they're gonna have like something that's not just gonna be a one. And I think it could have worked like that, but I honestly, how did you guys feel about that?
I thought it was fine. What I don't know what's wrong with women. Like it's a moment for just them two, right?
Yeah.
Like two women dancing because they like want a case and they're dancing in their office privately. Like it's fine. And she's also obviously the character's obviously a fan of Megan Thee Stallion. If you're a fan of
Yeah.
Megan Thee Stallion, you're gonna dance, you're gonna twerk. And when she's right there in front of you, and I think the funniest part was actually the very end, which she's like, Megan, I will kill for you. And Megan's like,
Shit, I
"All
told
right,
it down.
chill out, chill
Yeah,
out."
chill out.
Like I thought that was hilarious, and I actually ended up laughing. My wife was laughing; she thought it was funny too.
Okay.
And I know people are upset at the twerking, and it's like, oh, she's like I think that goes back to, oh, she's supposed to be a female model, a superhero for girls, and I'm like, at the same time, it's you know how relatable that is for especially like for women
A
that
lot of
just
women.
yeah they're just dancing and having fun, and I don't see the problem with it at all.
I mean,
Exactly.
Like I'm not a proponent of twerking and all that,
Yeah.
and but at the same time, it's like two women having fun privately.
Exactly.
Well, I mean,
Even the
is
balls-
it privately
even
though?
the
That's
balls
not
kind-
work. So
clear
having fun
window.
professionally would be more the wording for it.
No, I think, and
I mean-
even you could tell Eric is right because even when the boss sees them dancing, he just kind of takes it like it's just women being women, you know, like they're just enjoying themselves, and because he saw them doing the dancing and twerking and all that, and he just kind of
walks
like
away.
he just walked away, right, without you, like he just kind of saying, and like okay, women being women, you know, and it's understandable.
okay. I actually have a couple of a couple of female friends who are very much comic book nerds and into it. And they're particularly irritated by the way that a lot of guys are reacting to that scene. And one of the things that they both pointed out is that Zemo had a dance moment and everybody thought it was funny and hysterical, and Disney even released an hour-long thing of him just dancing to like make fun of it. And they're saying their impression of it is that guys just get mad if you see women having fun, that's how women that's how women
Well, I'm
behave.
gonna go, but you
It's not
keep going, Jimmy.
yeah, like it's like a double standard that if a male superhero or a male character in that universe were to do it, you wouldn't see that kind of
And I
backlash.
think that's why they did it on purpose. Now they bring that up.
But
Yeah,
it's more
maybe.
so the only thing, like I don't have an issue with it because of that. Like girls having fun, men having fun. It's all the same. I don't, as long as it's fitting for the story and the character. Jen is somebody who presents herself as very modest, very professional, and then all of a sudden she says, "Oh, I'm a big Megan Thee Stallion fan," and she's dancing in a professional environment with all of her coworkers watching her. That's just more the thing. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't feel very fitting for a character. A lot of people compare it to like Star-Lord and Star-Lord dancing, or even emo Peter dancing. The thing where emo Peter, it was so bad that it was good. It was so cringe that it was good. That's why it's
He's the one who
become a
started it
meme
all.
in our culture,
Yeah.
and that's why it's become to be this continued thing. Star-Lord, it actually took me a little bit to warm up to, more so because it's a very subtle thing, but it's a very big part of his character. He used music as a way to cope with the tragic loss of his mom, and as a way to kind of not feel that loss with her, and that fact he didn't get to say goodbye, and that he kind of turned away from her because he was scared at that moment. And when you see it from that context, obviously we see that from the very beginning. Like when he goes to get the Power Stone, he's dancing to Redbone.
Mhm.
We see that as a very
Yeah.
consistent thing. It wasn't like it just came out of left field and it came out of nowhere. It was something that was a very consistent. Granted, I don't like it in that sense that also too, with Ronan doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So using it as a distraction tool makes a whole lot of sense from that context of his character. More so if someone's having fun and doing, like, I don't have the issue. It's more so it feels like it's done out of left field and it's done as a cutaway to appeal to that younger demographic. That's the only reason why it kind of bothered me.
I actually feel like this whole show and even that scene is more for our demographic, because I know so many professionals, I know teachers and all that who will dance like that behind closed
Yeah.
doors, and they're like our age, and lawyers, engineers, doctors that I know that if we're having like, if we're just drinking, having fun, they're gonna dance, and that's what we're gonna do. And but we're all professionals, and we have our careers and stuff. We have this almost like this front that we have to put up half the time. So I feel like it actually was even more relatable to see something like that happen. Like, she knows when to let go. She obviously drinks on the show too. Like, she's out trying to get drunk with the Hulk in the first episode with Bruce.
I mean,
Like, I think she's not always presenting like herself as this super stand up and put together person. I think she's just like showing that she's trying to put up this front at all times too. Also goes along with the experience of being a woman in America.
I mean, this is also this is just me. As far as like, I think we all have like different sides to ourselves. And most people kind of get shocked by me. Like, you may not realize this, but I actually love dancing. If I'm at a party,
I know, I saw you
with dancing, and everybody gets shocked as like, oh, James is dancing. Like, I love dancing. I love dancing. I love partying. People get shocked that I'm into a lot of like hardcore rap and gangster rap, and people always look at me like, you're into that? I thought you were. As like, I think we all have different sides to us and different interests that come out in different areas of our lives.
And then that just goes to show that people are quick to judge. They don't know the full story. They don't know anyone's background fully, and they just gonna open their mouth and say things that don't make sense sometimes. But I love it because but the other thing that made me think about it, it was like the way it ended though. I thought she was just a lawyer for like superheroes and all that stuff. Or like people that have been in trouble with the law that have superpowers. Why is she over there signing Megan Thee Stallion?
Yeah,
because she signed
I
it.
mean,
That's
a high profile client.
My new first client. So I'm like what? Megan, you superhero now all of a sudden, or what? Like, I don't know.
I don't think she'll be around anymore.
She's a scroll. Nah, I know, I'm just messing. But it just, when you pay attention to details, like, okay, she's a superhero lawyer, so why she over here signing Megan? But
I think that.
It was cool.
Yeah.
And see, that was the fourth cameo already, so it was like,
I know.
Like, man, it's gonna keep on bringing more for sure.
Well, with this, it's almost halfway through. What would you guys rate the series so far?
How many episodes are they giving it?
6
or 7. 6.
We're halfway through.
Daredevil still hasn't appeared yet, so that's going to be coming.
I've been waiting for Frogman.
Frogman 2. Frogman 2.
We're making an appearance. Damn. See, he's gonna come on the next one.
I give it a 7.5. So actually almost an 8.
That's fair.
And
10.5
well. It's not the best MCU show. It's not.
Definitely not.
Especially the CGI is shoddy. It's
that's
it's rough
exactly
at times.
we haven't talked about either. It's like
Yeah. Actually, I read something about the CGI, which is really interesting, where people say like the Hulk CGI on the same show was actually done really well. Like, what is going on here? And there's like some like VFX artists that were saying that it's actually it's easier to do CGI from a person that has very definitive features, someone like Mark Ruffalo, versus a character that doesn't. And then on top of that, they're trying to make She-Hulk, like, her hair has to be perfect, her skin has to be perfect.
Yeah.
And the actress herself doesn't have very defined features. So even if you're thinking of like Thanos, for example, when you have that actor, it's easier to move that to CGI just because they're very defined features and they're like chins and the cheekbones and stuff.
The jaws, straight square jaws and all that. Like, makes sense.
So I thought that was really interesting. So they're saying like technically the CGI is the same. It's just a lot easier to identify the Hulk as Mark Ruffalo as it is to identify She-Hulk as I guess the Jennifer Walters character.
That makes sense.
Different.
Yeah. But even then, I mean, it's not no excuse. Right,
exactly. It's very shoddy.
Like, we're still expecting good quality to come out of the MCU.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key reasons I'm getting a 7.5. And also, I think the most action we got was in the first episode, and I do want to see a little more action, either on the lawyer side where we see like more like Daredevil type of lawyering, right? Of like really going in and trying to like figure something out. Which we saw with Emil Blonsky, and that's cool now. But at the same time, I want to see like something like really extreme happen on that side or on the superhero side. I want to see like a villain or what's her name, Titania, come back.
Yeah.
Something. I want to see something happen on that where she's like really confronted to like be the She-Hulk superhero versus just the attorney at law. So
What
I
about
haven't
you,
gotten
Ruben?
that yet, so that's why I get 7.5.
What about
Yeah,
you? What
I
do you rate it?
agree. I'm at a 7.5 as well because, like I said, it's more comedy than anything, you know. And they had the cameos and everything, which I think is awesome. Wong did a good freaking good job. I didn't even know he was. I already knew he was funny from Doctor Strange, but I didn't know he had like that little extra touch where I think it's pretty funny. Yeah, 7.5 just for that same reason, because it's a comedy that's keeping me reeled in right now. Because obviously I said there wasn't too much action lately, like Eric just said. But the way they're making it happen is like I'm in it. I'm in it. And like I said, I'm excited for the 4th episode. We still haven't seen Daredevil, like you brought up. That completely slipped my mind. And so yeah, 7.5. And who knows, it probably still get better depending on how these last episodes go.
Yeah. I definitely rank it as a 7. I think it works as this comedic take on superhero law. Obviously, we saw a take on a show revolving around law with Daredevil, but that was obviously more of like this gritty crime-esque, very heavy action fight sequence heavy show. So for this to have a different kind of tone and feel to it, I think is something that's cool and kind of just goes to show that not everything has to be cut and paste the same, and it has to fit the character and the story and the setting that it's telling. So overall, I give it a 7. Think it could be a little bit better, but we'll see how it ends. And I'm looking forward to see what route they're gonna take with Abomination, and obviously they're already hinting at Thunderbolts, how exactly Daredevil is gonna come into play. I'm just kind of eager to see how it all wraps up with these next 3 episodes. So
one more thing,
stuff.
I did like the way they promoted it, like real life lawyers on the benches, like out here, us watching it, like on the benches, on the buses, you know.
Yeah.
I was like, that's dope, that's smart, that's good advertisement, good publicity and all that. So I thought that was another thing that was.
Did you actually see some of the advertisement that had Titania like graffitiing over those posters?
No,
Yeah.
I need to catch one of those.
They've gone all out with the marketing for the show. Pretty smart.
That is pretty cool. But moving on from that, so on September 5th of this year was the 30th anniversary of Batman the Animated Series. So I knew that it was coming. I didn't exactly know when. It was kind of, there wasn't really a whole lot preparation I had before it. So it kind of, when I woke up, I had seen it on Instagram and I was like, oh crap, today. Yeah, I remember it was like somewhere around September 92, but I just didn't remember the exact date. So I just wanted to talk about its relevance, its impact, its legacy, and if you guys feel that it holds up. Is it overrated? Is it underrated? And just what all of that. So I kind of wanted to go to you guys first because you guys will probably have a little bit of a different opinion on it, just being that me and Jimmy are big Batman fans. So Ruben, let's start with you. What do you think about Batman the Animated Series legacy?
Well, man, that just takes me back, way back and all that. And honestly, just 30 years. When you bring up 30 years, it's like damn, we had the time. Like I'm turning 30 on Friday, bro. So it's like dang, that's already a little bit older than me. And like, so just growing up watching it, I felt like, for me, it's kind of one of the shows that kind of started it off. When I started watching animated shows when I was a little kid, and there was obviously like X-Men and all that stuff too. But I think Batman was the one I would always watch first because of the timing, if I'm not mistaken.
It used to come on right before X-Men the Animated Series on Fox Kids. They were
exactly.
They were back to back.
That's how it always happened. I was like, this is the first show I always watch. And then just the voice and everything to Batman and everything, it reminds me, it was like, that's Batman and shit. And then, well, I won't go deep into it, but I just know that I just can't believe it's been 30 years. And that's probably one of the shows that, like I said, kind of reeled me into being like a superhero fanatic as a young kid. Without that, so much love to that show, without a doubt. And man, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for things like that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with Ruben. It's crazy to think that it's been 30 years. And I've started watching it again because my son, right? Like I want to introduce him to superheroes. And dude, a lot of these shows, these episodes still hold up. Like
Right.
they're really good. Obviously, they have its little things like the phones are weird or the technology's off, but that doesn't really matter because the story still holds up. And
Yeah.
like the presence and persona of Batman, and then you have our introduction to Mark Hamill's Joker and the first appearance of Harley Quinn
Mhm.
and all that. Like all those episodes, I'm just rewatching them and like I'm enjoying them as much as my son is. Just like he doesn't even know half the stuff that's going on because he doesn't like understand the whole story, the plot. But he sees Batman punching bad guys and he's like, "This is awesome!" And he's like running around with his cape and stuff. And I was like, "Dude, that brings me back." There's definitely a nostalgia factor to it, but even then, like it still holds up. And like I could sit down and even if I wasn't watching it with my kids, I could have it in the background and just be listening to it, watching it while I'm like doing work and stuff at my desk. Like it's definitely just one of those shows that it's timeless.
Because even being as little kids, we did not care about the animation. Like we were just there
Yeah.
for what we saw, the action, and
Yeah.
whatever they were saying. But
Yeah.
we
And
did
you
not
grow
care
to appreciate the plot and everything else that's going on later on in life. But
about
yeah, it's cool. It's pretty awesome to see.
Well, Jimmy, I've been waiting on this all day, man. What about you?
I mean, this is the foundation of what got me into comic books. It is the reason I am a Batman fanatic, is Batman the animated series. It is the definitive take on the character. Even if you include the comics, which I mean, I love the comics. I think this has the most fully comprehensive, well-rounded version of Batman, Gotham City, his rogues gallery, his personality, Bruce Wayne, his presence. um I think the look of it still holds up. I mean, some of the animation style is obviously not something that we would have now, but I love like that it was drawn on black paper, where most cartoons are drawn on white paper,
Mhm.
and then you kind of
Crazy.
shaded. This one like let the black like be the foundation for everything, and it gives it this really shadowy look. And they modeled it off of film noir and dark and art deco, and they called it like dark deco.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah. And I think like the backgrounds, which look like paintings sometimes, I think the visual style still holds up. I love that these episodes had scores, full on scores. Before this, animated shows were not scored. They had a couple of like songs or like things that they put on and would put repeat. This one actually had a composer watch every episode and compose everything. They had title cards at the beginning, kind of we called like 30s animated films. And I think what amazes me most when I watch it now is how did I even like this as a little kid? Because some of the episodes have hardly any action in them. One of the very best episodes features actually virtually no Batman in until the end, which is Perchance to Dream.
Oh my God, such a
God,
great episode.
that is
my favorite.
Yeah, that is arguably the best episode, and it is purely about the psychology of Bruce Wayne and about him being damaged as a person and how he deals with it as a human being. And as an older person watching it, I'm kind of amazed that they actually got away with the writing on the show, dude. Like
Yeah.
the things that they talked about. I think that's what makes it hold up, is that the writing is complex enough that even as an adult, you'll appreciate things about it that you won't pick up on as a kid. But there's still so much there to excite the imagination when you're a kid. And I think that's what's cool about the show, is like it doesn't talk down, it doesn't treat the kid audience like it's stupid. And I think it's really interesting because I have some older friends who are like in their 40s and 50s, so they were a bit older when Batman the animated series. I have friends who said that they were like teenagers, and some that were there in the early 20s, and they used to get excited to watch Batman the animated series whenever it came on. So I think it's something that all ages can enjoy, and it has fantastic voice work, great writing. Not every episode is good, especially within the first 20 episodes. There's like 20 episodes. There's like a handful of episodes, which I'm not going to tick off right here, that are particularly bad, and a couple that are cheesy. But after a while, they kind of like figure it out. And once it hit a stride, it never looked back. And I think it's such a high quality program and such quality writing, great voice acting. And it made me a Batman fan. And I don't think it's overrated, but I don't think it's underrated either. It's not overrated,
Mm.
but you can't say it's underrated because it's the most beloved piece of Batman
Right.
media. Whenever it's spoken about or written about, it's spoken about in very reverential tones, and people always talk about its legacy. So I don't think it's underrated. I think it's justly rated for what it is.
Right.
It's the take on Batman. And the one last thing I wanted to add, what I like about this version of Batman and Bruce Wayne is, and I like it. I like, Batman is an edgy character, but there's a tendency in modern Batman to try to portray Batman as this edge lord. And I get it. I get it. And it works a lot of the time. But I think sometimes, especially latter day Frank Miller is what I'm thinking of, where you forget that he's supposed to be a hero and he's supposed to be at heart a good person. And I think this Bruce Wayne is the warmest version of Bruce Wayne, somebody who actually genuinely cares about philanthropy. His relationship with Harvey Dent, before he turns into Two-Face, and how he struggles to help him out. And he really is a really good, sweet person at
Mhm.
heart, who just uses like the visuals of a bat or something to strike fear into it. But deep down, he's not as edgy as he is in some of the more modern versions of it. And I think that's what I appreciate, is that Bruce Wayne is a good human being on the show.
Right.
Good guy.
And I think that's like one of the two things that I wanted to talk about, because we see that more predominantly with the baby doll episode, where he actually has sympathy and is
Mhm.
trying to help her, knowing that she's damaged. And I think there's a lot of that relatability factor, because he's damaged, she's damaged, and really never had a childhood
Mhm.
because of what she went through. And not only that, but then even like the Clayface episode, he tells him the same thing, like, I can help you, like, we can fix you, let me try to help you, and exhaust that before going that route of just trying to beat him up or trying to beat the criminals up.
When he sees Mr. Freeze, like his origin story, and he realizes it, he gives a lot of sympathy to him, and he even understands his motives, and even helps him to come in a more just way, come after the people who are responsible for what happened to his wife. Except he doesn't do it by modes of vengeance. He does it to, like, try to bring them to justice. But there's a humanity there that I think is lacking in a lot of new Batman portrayals, is his sympathy for his villains, and his understanding for his villains, and his need to try to help them and relate to them. And I think that's important, because what makes Batman's villains really interesting is how most of his villains are a mirror of who he is. Just by some circumstances, he could have been on the other side of the fence doing something bad, but he chose to deal with his trauma by going in the opposite direction. And I love that the show emphasizes the humanity of Bruce Wayne and his general caring about other people.
Yeah. I mean, even Amanda Waller relates that same story to Terry McGinnis in that Justice League epilogue episode. And I really think that further goes to show, like, that's probably the version of Bruce Wayne, that Batman, that I relate to the most. Or when I think of Bruce Wayne Batman, that's exactly the kind of core elements I think the character should have. But also, too, what the show does very well, there's this problem more so amongst a lot of people and a lot of internet fandom that I see, where they talk about there's no way Batman is human. A lot of the stuff that he does is borderline metahuman, and a lot of the time is a plot, like what they call plot armor or PIS, plot induced stupidity, where he's just so overwhelmingly powerful to the point where he's pretty much able to defeat anybody and is able to take on pretty much anybody, but he's supposed to be human at his core without any kind of metahuman abilities or any kind of power up. But what I think the show does very well is you see him as a human. Granted, he's a very competent crime fighter. He's one of the most talented individuals on the planet. But at the same time, he gets sick. He has a sprained ankle. He has that one episode where his pupils get blown out, and he has to, they had like create this device that allows him to see, but only like very briefly. So I really think that there's this like thing that I really appreciate and respect, that there's a very human element. While he's very skilled and talented, he's human at his core, and he can be hurt just like anybody else. So I think the show does a very good job of presenting that best to its ability that we've seen in the media.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I don't think the show is, like, pretty much with you, Jimmy, it's not overrated, it's not underrated. I think people might have a tendency to say it's more overrated than underrated just because it's at the upper echelons of comic book media, one of the greatest examples in comic book media. So I think if anything, people would more grade it on the grades of overrated. But for me, it's perfectly where it is. It's one of the greatest, especially with Batman. It's one of the greatest things, and its legacy is gonna live on forever. And as time goes on, it's just gonna get better and better.
I mean, look at how much it's like influenced it. It's like for the most part in comic book or like superhero media, everything comes from the comics, and then the comic kind of influences the media. And it's rare that the media that's adapted from the comics in turns influences the comics back. This is one of those rare cases where one of the most popular modern Batman characters is Harley Quinn. That is not from the comics. That's from the animated series. It was so popular that they had to imitate it. Mr. Freeze's origin is straight out of the animated series. And in fact, Batman and Robin, I mean, I know that's not a good movie, but I do find it interesting that in Batman and Robin, they took the animated series origin stories for Victor Freeze over what was in the comics at the time, before the comics went back and adapted it. And I think the fact that like one of the main writer, Paul Dini, I mean, there's a lot of writers, but the one who's probably most acclaimed, he created Harley Quinn. He recreated Mr. Freeze's origin story. Detective Renee Montoya, that's another one that comes from the animated series, and she's part of it. I mean, shit, that Birds of Prey movie would not exist without Batman, the animated series.
Yeah.
But I love that it ended up being an influence back on the comic books, because it's such a definitive take on the character that even comic book writers had to kind of bow to it and acknowledge it as, you know, something that you can't ignore in the history of that character.
Definitely. That's also because of this universe, this franchise, this universe, because this actually started the DCAU, the DC animated universe that went on, I think, till the end of the run of the Justice League series. So I think you had like 10 plus years of continuity with Superman. You had like the Zeta Project, obviously Batman Beyond, and then Justice League also. But one of the things I think I've grown, you hear a bunch with stuff that's coming out, shows, movies, whatever, where people say, oh, do we even need this? Like, who asked for this? And that was the same sentiment that people had when they first announced Batman Beyond. But yet, Batman Beyond is critically lauded, and in a lot of ways, people actually favorably compare it to Batman the Animated Series, where they say it's better. But that's one of those things where because of that approach and that whole thing, I'm always taking it with at least a little bit of an earshot, or a little bit with a grain of salt. Like, okay, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful to see what kind of story they're telling, because that's exactly how we got Batman Beyond, from that whole thing where people are saying, oh, who needs this? Who asked for this? But that turned out to be one of the most memorable things in Batman franchise that is still talked about to this day. So definitely the show, its legacy and its impact cannot be understated, especially the stuff, how it influenced just pop culture as a whole. So
I mean, Paul Dini, even the writer, even wrote like the Arkham games, and it's not like coincidence that the Arkham games were written by somebody who masterminded the most popular elements of the animated series.
Yeah.
And so goes to so far as to try to use the voice actors from the animated series, just
exactly
the level of impact that it had. When I think of Batman, this is Batman. There are different versions of Batman, and there are even great versions of Batman. I mean, I love Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, and I love the Robert Pattinson Batman, but those are versions of Batman. Great versions, but not the Batman. To me, this is Batman. When I think of Batman, it's this guy. This version is Batman.
Definitely. So, like we said, it's been cool to just think back on. I've been actually waiting for this episode because I just really wanted, obviously I came prepared with this. So I was really excited and eager to talk about this. So you guys can actually check out all 3 seasons of Batman the Animated Series and the later editions, whereas the new Batman are the Adventures of Batman and Robin. You guys can check that out on HBO Max. Great show. Probably the most definitive version of Batman that we got, and just one of the greatest shows of all time. So make sure you guys check it out. And with all that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us. Sorry we've been inactive lately, but we're going to get back on to being more consistent. She-Hulk is on too. Make sure you guys check it out. We're going to be covering it up until the very end. So this is the Heroes of Mutants podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys.
Yeah.